Welcome to Real Estate Today with Yvonne Candy. Learn how to invest in today's residential and commercial real estate. Get informed and get the latest news and trends. Whether you're an investor, home buyer, or homeowner, or just want to be entertained, you're in the right place. And here's your host, Yvonne Candy.
Hi, everyone. We're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, credit. Yes, the source of all things. And if you don't know it by now, you soon will. Have you ever dealt with a credit repair company that charged you a hefty monthly fee and delivered little results? Well, my next guest, Laurie Zoock, owner of Credit Education Consultants, has put a new spin on how to help you with your credit repair problems legitimately. Welcome to the show, Laurie.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks for having me on.
Laurie, you are a talk show host, consumer advocate, and you also do a little PR. Tell us about that.
Okay, kind of interesting because everything for me kind of circled around. My background is actually professional sales and teaching, and I'm going to say probably 2001, 2002, I was the volunteer chairperson for public relations for the largest Great Dane rescue in the United States, an 8-state Great Dane rescue. And so PR for me sort of evolved out of that because I'm self-taught. When you're helping save Great Danes and you get hits from TV stations or radio stations, you got to go to the TV station or the radio station to do the interview. That actually turned into me being a public access host in New Jersey, where I'm from, back in 2004 to 2005 from doing that. I moved to Florida back in 2005, and I was licensed as a realtor but never actually worked as one. But I was on a RE/MAX team where somebody was trying to help people with credit, and that person left. And so they asked me to jump in, and I did. And I'll tell you, Yvonne, I cried for weeks because to read a credit report, and they're all different, was really difficult. Now, of course, it's very simple for me to do it. I've been doing it for a very long time. Coming out of doing the credit consulting business, I get a lot of questions from people on everything, on every topic, you name it. I've heard it. People seem to call me for advice on almost anything. And so I used to co-host a radio show with a realtor friend for about a year, and then he gave it up. And the guys at the station said, hey, why don't you do that consumer advocacy show that you wanted to do for so long? So I did about 75 episodes, one a week. And so now when someone calls me, instead of me spending 2 hours on the phone explaining the best way to buy a car and how to avoid, having your credit damaged doing that, I did all these radio shows that were all podcasts. So when I get a call now and someone says, how do you do fill in the blank? I go, wait, I did a radio show on that. Let me send you the podcast. And there's always an expert who gives their information at the end. So I found it actually to be a great time saver. And so that's how I ended up doing my own shows. I ultimately did another show called The World of Laurie Zoock, which got picked up for national syndication. It was a variety show. It had consumer advocacy, any topic, famous musicians, interesting people, and so that's kind of how that happened. So between everything and doing the PR for the Great Dane Rescue and being self-taught, I just had to learn so much myself in a short amount of time that now it's just a natural thing. So I can swing back between being a credit consultant, a freelance publicist, and a talk show host all at the same time.
Wow. You wear a lot of hats. In a way, it seems like they're all, related to one another.
They actually are all related. To me, they're all related. So that's why I don't find it so difficult. Just sometimes time constraints with certain things. With any of these things I do, there can be a rush situation, which sometimes can be difficult depending on my schedule, but I try to make everything work for everybody whenever I can.
You say that the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, deems that most credit repair companies are fraudulent. So What do you do when you need help?
Well, you have to find someone that's not a credit repair company. And if you want, I can explain how that works. But ultimately, you need to find someone like me who's a credit consultant or a non-attorney consumer advocate. There are attorneys that do it, but typically a lot more expensive. So you've got to find an expert in their field with excellent referrals and testimonials. Usually mortgage people and loan originators, and some realtors, they have people that they know are going to be legitimate in helping people solve their problems.
Right, through experience and networking and what have you. Probably some referrals, because finding legitimate people is very hard. I
agree.
Know, yeah, it's very hard. Well, I've heard so many stories where people have been ripped off and, they didn't get any type of results whatsoever. You find that usually when someone has used a person and had success, then they're the ones that you should use. Not all the time, because I do know one company that's very well known that, and we'll talk about them later, and I won't mention any names, but they're very well known, and they're not doing very much for people. And I think one of the reasons why so many people use them is because they are ignorant to the credit repair business. And that's one of the reasons why I like to have shows like this, because there's a lot of people out there that don't know what is supposed to be legitimate or fair in the credit repair business.
Right. And one thing I want to mention on that is when you're checking out a company, you can always put the name of the company in, and then next to it type the word ratings or complaints, things like that, where it'll show you how many complaints they have, or it'll show you their ratings, by customers. Hopefully they're verified, because nowadays anybody can write ratings.
Right.
But that's one way to check. But I find like for me, I work with pretty much a set group of mortgage people and realtors, but I do get a lot of referrals from the clients that I've helped, because they know that I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm going to tell them what they need to hear, and I'm not going to tell them what they want to hear. So that's the difference.
One of the things that these credit repair companies do is charge you an upfront fee. Isn't that illegal?
It is, but what they can do is bill it as an administrative fee or a setup fee, but usually it's an administrative monthly fee. So that's what they can get away with doing a lot of times. Sometimes companies won't bill until after, but the problem for that is that, people who have bad credit, a large portion of the time, they're not in good financial shape. And so then it becomes risky for the service to take that client on because they may not get paid. So it's really a double-edged sword there.
Right. How do you get your credit report if you don't have one?
Well, most people will go to annualcreditreport.com. Now, you can do it online, but if you can't pass all their security questions, they'll mail it to you, but they don't give you your scores. Now, here's the thing. If you are applying for a mortgage, and I want to talk about this, if you're applying for a mortgage, it's a hard-hit inquiry when you go through a lender. So when I work with, my set group of mortgage people, sometimes they'll send me over a credit report. But if the client told them, well, my scores are really low, they tell them what I tell them, which is go to myfico.com, which is owned by the FICO company. And you can go online to do that, and you can pull your own 3 bureau reports. And when you do that, it doesn't take any points off your score. But MyFICO will show you a series of FICO scores, including the mortgage score. MyFICO makes their money based on providing different algorithms and scores for different industries. So if I look at annualcreditreport.com, it doesn't necessarily give me a lot of information, and it's very difficult to read for most people, even for me. MyFICO.com, piece of cake, and it's going to show those real scores. Other credit monitoring services, what they usually show are consumer FICO scores, which basically in English means absolutely nothing to a consumer who's trying to get a car loan or trying to get a home loan.
Right, because I noticed that on some of the other monitoring service, let's say Experian.com. Experian usually gives you the different FICO scores, which a lot of people don't even know the difference between a mortgage FICO score and an insurance score or a credit card FICO score. I mean, they just don't know. But it gives you a series. And I guess if you're going to apply for a mortgage, if you use a monitoring service like Experian.com, you should look at the the mortgage FICO score. But are they accurate? Are they up to date?
Well, one thing I can answer on that is that different mortgage companies may use different versions of the mortgage FICO score. Just like there's different software versions of Windows or Word or computer programs. So it can vary a few points, even if it's on the same day. And what's also more difficult is, let's just say you hypothetically pulled your mortgage through a mortgage lender in the morning, but something updated. You made a payment to a credit card and it updated that afternoon, and then you had your mortgage pulled again through, say, another company. It can be different, and people don't realize that. It can change that frequently.
And that's because they have their own way of calculating your FICO score, or does it just change like that systematically?
Well, both. It can change systematically, but it changes every time you make a payment. And remember, when you make a payment to, say, a credit card company, each of the three bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, may have different update dates. So everything may not update at the exact same time. So that's why it can be somewhat complicated for consumers to understand. They just think, hey, I'm going to, get one set of scores on this day. Well, and again, if a lender is using a different software version, because there's more than one for mortgage, then it can also be different. So the truth is, no one really knows. It's kind of like a game without rules. Is the best way I could describe it.
Like an inside secret.
Right, exactly.
That's the way it seems like it's an insider. But at any rate, I wanted to make sure that the listeners know that when you get your free credit report, it's usually one annually, correct?
Yes, one annually, unless you're an ID theft victim, and then you can get 3 per year.
Okay, great. I know many people like to use the Credit Karma monitoring service. It's free and it is very popular, but I don't find that their credit scores are the same as when you get to the bank. So tell me about Credit Karma.
Yeah, I'm laughing. I'm laughing over Credit Karma because it's usually that when I get a phone call from a prospective client, that's the very first question is, my Credit Karma says I have a 700 score, but my mortgage lender tells me 650. They're always very upset, and I have to explain. Credit Karma does not use FICO scores. They use Vantage scores, which is a different scoring model. So if you are in the lower credit numbers, and credit runs from 300 up to 850. So if you're in, say, anything lower than 700, there could be a 50-point difference on your real report. You could be 50 points lower. Wow. Now, the higher your scores are, the closer Credit Karma will be. And it's free for a reason, and let me explain that. Well, first off, it shows you TransUnion and it shows you Equifax, but not Experian. So if something is showing up and some company is only reporting on your reports to Experian, you're out of luck on Credit Karma. What they want you to do is they're supported by advertisers. So they want you to either open, close, or balance transfer existing credit cards. And what happens is those things can actually drop your scores. So to me, I want to say for the purposes of what I do, it would not be a recommended site for that reason. It's not real scores. It doesn't have Experian. So that's why I don't recommend it.
A lot of people like Credit Karma because they recommend these credit cards to you. Say, okay, you're probably going to be approved for this, and they figure on it's like a one-stop place.
Right, but it's a bait and switch because usually they may do a soft pull, which won't take any points off of your score, but they may do a hard pull if you give your Social Security number to those credit cards, and that's where it becomes dangerous. Because if you're going to a lender and they see that you've pulled your credit 10 times on different credit cards, well, each of those hard hit inquiries, I would estimate at 2 to 5 points each, because FICO doesn't reveal points, but I've been doing this for about 12 years. And so if you have your credit pulled 10 times, it could be a 20 to 50 point drop. Wow. And that's why you have to be careful, picky, and choosy about applying for credit, because you can actually hurt yourself.
As far as getting a mortgage is concerned, when we were talking about like mortgages, which I wanted to get into the second half of this anyway, if you run your credit report several times, it doesn't count as much against your FICO score. You want to just explain that real briefly?
Well, yes, it can and it can't, depending on the situation. Mm-hmm. So here's how I understand it from mortgage people. Most of them use a third-party company. For example, they may use SARMA as a company to pull credit. So with SARMA, if that client goes back to that same mortgage person that's using that SARMA, they can pull it a certain amount of times within 28 days, and it won't affect the point. It'll just be 1 point hit, which is the 2 to 5 points. However, if you're going to a mortgage broker and they're sending out, requests, they're doing a hard inquiry on each of the different companies, then it's their individual hard hits, and that's where it becomes dangerous. And there are people that will disagree with me, but again, I've been doing this for a long time, and I look at credit reports all the time, and that's the only thing that I can see that will drop their score so dramatically is when they're using a mortgage broker to do it. Just for example, if you go to buy a car, because it's the same way, you got to buy a car, and you go to the finance guy. Okay, now me being a credit person, I go in and I make them sign a piece of paper saying you're only going to pull my credit one time, because I know how it works from reading everybody else's report. They go in and the auto finance, while they're searching for the lender, they're pulling the report. I've seen 10 to 20 times. And so in that case, it's through different companies. Now they've lowered your score 50 points or more, telling you they're trying to get you the best deal with the lowest interest rate, when in effect they've lowered your score for you.
Right. I've seen that with auto loans. That's good advice, though, to not to use a broker and to go to these individual mortgage companies yourself. That's really good advice. We were talking about getting your annual credit report. Once you get that annual credit report, what is it that you need to pay attention to outside of just your credit score?
Okay. Well, on any credit report, the very first things that I look at before I even look at the credit lines, the trade lines, I look at the personal information, the name, the address. I look to see, is there more than one social security number? Is there anything that doesn't seem to match up right, that looks funky? Because a lot of times what people don't realize is that when they give their name and social security and address to a lender, and that lender pulls the credit bureaus actually, their programs search for people with similar information. So it's very common, especially like if you're a junior senior for a man, to have a merged credit file where someone else's information is on your report. Now, I'll tell you a bad story. One of my first clients many years ago had a common name, and on her report it had her name but with a different middle initial. And then it showed that she owned 10 homes that were all in foreclosure.
Oh, my goodness.
And she was a first-time home buyer. She's like, well, what's going on? So I did a little investigating, actually, and it turned out that this other person with her name and a different middle initial was in South Florida and was basically a criminal. And bought 10 houses, equity stripped them, back around 2007 or so. And then everything hit the report. So when her report got pulled, it merged in with that particular client. So it's not uncommon. So the very first thing is, how does your name appear? Sometimes it's a typo, but sometimes it comes up with completely different names, variations of names, addresses the client has never lived at. More than one social security number. Now, that can happen if they have joint credit with somebody, or, for example, if they have a child that had medical bills, then that's possible. But I'll give you one more quick story of I had a client, again, with a fairly common last name, lived in an apartment. Next door lived a guy, same last name, not related. They both had, guess what? They both had credit reports with each other's information on it. Those are actually not too hard to get them to correct. But that's the first thing that you look at on the report.
Well, I know that story very well because my son is the third. So,
oh, boy.
Yes, my father-in-law senior, my husband junior, and for years. My father-in-law passed on, and it's still a mess. I mean, it's my husband still is fighting things from his father, and then my husband's also fighting things from his son, and the son is fighting things from his father. I mean, it's just a big
It's a mess. See, that's why you shouldn't name them all after each other. People like doing that, but that is what happens. It's almost dangerous to name your son junior or the third, because it's, in a way, with the bureaus, it's asking for trouble.
Oh, yes, it definitely is. But what's even more rare, like you was talking about the person next door, is my name is the same as his mother's name.
Oh, no.
Now,
you have each other's stuff on your report?
Yeah. I mean, I've had it before, but how much of a coincidence is that?
Yeah.
You marry a person that got the same name as your mother, and then you have the same name as your father, and then you have a son that has your name. That's
exactly.
that's like trouble all the way around.
Exactly. Yep. You need to somehow differentiate the name, something, but sometimes that's just not possible. But it's very common, and that's why I look at that information first, because if there's merged information and then the client says to me, well, hey, this account, I don't know what this isn't mine. Right. Well, if I can see it's a merged file, then that can definitely explain it. But that's why you look at personal information first, and then the next step is I actually go through the actual credit report. So for my clients, what I do is I actually make up a spreadsheet where I'm looking for specific information. Once I put that spreadsheet together, then I actually do a phone call with the client and review every single little thing that's negative. One thing I want to point out, like when I work with a client, I work with them on negative issues first, and then I want to make sure they have enough positive credit. So what happens is you work on negative first, because you don't want collectors or companies you owe money to see that you've added secured credit cards, because now they think you have money. So when you have a lot of outstanding debt, that's bad debt, things that have been charged off or that are in collection, and you put those secured credit cards on, well, they can look at your report and go, oh, look, Yvonne just put two $1,000 secured credit cards on her account. Yay, she has money. And that makes it much more difficult to teach the client how to negotiate when it comes to the negative debt, the bad debt. So, you got to work in a specific order. And so when I work with a client, I put them through my own process, sort of like credit school online, and I explain everything. I give them reading information so that as they go through the process, they're going to understand what's happening. And what's interesting is some clients I have actually read the reading information, but some don't, and I can tell because they're asking questions that were already answered in these simple reading information documents that I sent them.
So in other words, you're saying that let's attack all the negative stuff first before we put the positive stuff on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, now once you get your credit report and you see that there's discrepancies on there, or let's say you want to dispute something, what do you do?
Yep. When you see discrepancies on the report, and you can certainly mark up a report, you can send dispute letters to the credit bureaus. But I want to explain how it works, because what credit repair companies do is exactly this, except that they don't usually let you see the letters when they do the disputes. So here's how credit repair works. You're the client. You've hired a company. The companies usually send out 3 letters a month, one to each bureau. Some may send out letters to collectors or creditors, but most do the 3 bureaus. Okay, so you, the client, you think, hey, they're going to send out these letters and bingo bango, they're going to just take it off my report. My scores are going to go up real quick. Here's how it really works. Most of those disputes are optically scanned looking for keywords. They're scanned and they go to people in foreign countries. Your dispute is converted into one of, I believe it's 22 two-digit codes that matches up to whatever your dispute issue is. At that point, they can enter it into a computer program, and they use a system called eOscar. eOscar is how the bureaus, creditors, and collectors correspond with each other online. So you've done that dispute. Let's just say it goes to TransUnion. They've scanned it. It's been converted to 2-digit codes. It now goes out, that dispute, electronically to the creditors and to the collectors. Unless there is a change from what was originally on the report, chances are that it's going to shoot right back to the credit bureau the same way, and then it's going to come back to you, the client, the same way. So that's how credit repair works. And when you're fighting the credit bureaus, even if you have a legal dispute under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which states obviously that, it's supposed to be marked the correct way, you may have to hire an attorney if you have an issue under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and that is actually pretty pricey. So just sending out dispute letters to the credit bureaus does not do much. Where you have a better chance in dealing with the situation is direct letters to the creditors, for example, that have charged off, or to collection agencies. And when a client works with me, we're looking for certain information to come back from these companies. And one of the most important things is, what was the date of initial delinquency? Meaning, when did that client initially default on the debt? Now, if they made payments after that initial default and then defaulted again, then that becomes the initial date of default, initial delinquency. And so why is that important? Because that sets the clock for the statute of limitations in whatever state they're in. So I'm in Florida. There's a 5-year statute of limitations for debt collection. In all states, there is a 7-year statute of limitations for credit reporting, with the exception of government debt. They exclude themselves from everything on government debt. So those are some important things that I think people need to know as far as how it works when you do a dispute. Do not expect a lot of changes back. You might, for example, have a credit line showing up on all 3 bureaus, and one might come back and delete it for whatever reason, and the other 2 won't. Just because one deletes it does not mean the other 2 will.
Think that it's a hopeless case to send off letters to the credit bureau.
Okay, it's not a hopeless case, because you want the protection mechanism of the Fair Credit Reporting Act in the event that there is some type of legitimate legal issue, in which case, of course, you would ultimately end up going to an attorney. Just so you know, there are people who sue the credit bureaus and win millions of dollars. They're usually under non-disclosure agreements, but there are people who do win a lot of money for that. You really want to deal with the creditors and the collection agencies. So in my case, my clients send out letters to all of them.
Yeah, I know people that send letters out, and they send them out registered mail.
Yes.
People tell them don't do it online. What is your preference?
Definitely do it by certified return receipt mail. That is your protection. If you do it online or over the phone, your rights are not, my understanding from lawyers is your rights are not protected legally. So you definitely want to do something in writing, send it certified return receipt, and keep a copy of everything that you send out.
I know someone that was doing credit repair, and they seemed to have a hold on 2 credit bureaus. There was one credit bureau that was not cooperating. What do you do in a situation like that?
Okay, I'll tell you what I do. First off, you can file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by going to consumerfinance.gov, and it'll walk you through how to file a complaint. The other thing that you can look to do is, every state has a Department of Corporations where you can look up the company name and then find the executives' names for that company. And then you can resend that letter, certified return receipt mail, to an executive, and it will get to their corporate office. They call it an account takeover a lot of times, where someone from the corporate office will manually oversee whatever the issue is.
Oh, that's great. I never thought of that.
Yeah, you got to be like a private detective. Yeah, that's what you got to do nowadays.
Yeah.
You got to go to the top sometimes.
That's great. Yeah, I like that.
You're listening to Real Estate Today with Yvonne Candy.
We were talking about deleting debt. What do you feel about paying off debt? Some people says, "Oh, I got to pay everything off, and that's going to raise my credit score." What do you think about that?
Okay, well, if it comes to existing good credit lines, for example, like your credit cards, unless you're going for a loan, the answer is yes. Pay everything off and do not owe money because you don't want to owe interest. And also, paying everything off, over a long period of time will help raise the scores. The more you owe of that available limit of that credit card, the more you max them out, then the lower your scores will drop. So it's kind of like a ping pong ball effect because most people pay their credit cards once a month. Okay, since I'm the crazy credit lady, Yvonne, I do it differently. If I make sure that if I'm going to charge something, I have the money to back it up. So I may actually send multiple payments. I want the merchant protection by using the credit card, and also the points sometimes. So I will, if I go out and I make, a couple $100 purchase on something, I'll go home and I print up my own little statement that I have on my computer that has my credit card account number on it. And then I put in a check and I mail it in. And by the way, I don't use auto debit or auto pay. I actually mail things because I want an actual copy of my check as proof. It's also good tax time because my accountant, when she goes through everything, can see exactly in the notes what I've paid for.
What about those collection accounts? Yeah. Should you pay them off?
That's a whole topic in itself. Okay, so collections, the mortgage people that I work with already know to tell clients, before you pay anything off, call Laurie and she'll explain how it works. So here's how it works. When you have collections, if you just pay them, most of the time it is going to be like the bomb to your credit reports. It can drop your score 30 to 100 points by paying a collection. And I know all the listeners are going, wait, that can't be right.
Yeah.
I'm paying it and it's zeroing out, so my score should go up.
Wow.
But what you don't know is that in the FICO scoring model, the old date of the debt comes current to today when you paid it, and that's what drops the score. And of course, the larger the debt, the bigger the drop. So
wow.
I can't tell people don't pay your collections. When I work with a client, we actually make sure that the company will validate the debt first. I want my clients to get copies of itemized bills, of things that may have been signed if their signature was on something, how they arrived at the amount due, because collection agencies may try either legally or illegally to add additional fees, penalties, interest, lawyers' fees, etc., onto that debt. So we want the client to look at it and say, hey, is that yours? Is it correct? Do you think that or was there some issue where you were fighting with them? And did you keep any of those letters, which is very, very important? That makes things a lot easier. A lot of times if the collection agency made an error, for example, when a creditor charges off, they charge off usually after a specific amount of time. They may have tried collection efforts, it didn't work. But remember, I said that date of initial delinquency is very important. So let's just say 2 years ago today was the date of initial delinquency, and now the creditor has sold it off or assigned it to a collection agency. Those collection agencies like to re-age the debt to the date they bought it. So now it's on your report for another 7 years instead of the remaining 5 years because it's a 2-year-old debt. Does that make sense?
Right, and that's why you keep seeing these different dates on your credit report. And also get different collection companies, because one collection company can sell it to another, And
another, and they hide under different names and subsidiaries.
And it never comes off.
Right, and you can send a letter to one company and a response comes back from another company, and they make it as difficult as possible for you to understand anything. And that's why the date of initial delinquency from the original creditor is so important. So, for example, since I'm in Florida, and there's a 5-year statute of limitations on non-governmental debt, then after 5 years, that company can't legally collect. Now, there are some scammy companies that will still try to collect, and if you don't know the law and you pay it, you've just destroyed your credit without even, realizing that you didn't have to pay that debt because it's past the statute of limitations. However, it can stay on for 7 years. So if you're between the 5 years have passed, but up to 7 years before it falls off, and you're trying to get a mortgage, then you have to try and negotiate an agreement to delete with that collector. Now, that's hard to explain on the phone because I can only give generals and not specifics.
Well, I
But
understand
typically,
what you're saying, because what you're
okay,
actually, let me put it in simple terms for the
yep,
listeners. In other words, if you make an agreement with a collector in return for that agreement or payment, you're asking them to delete the negative item on your credit report.
correct.
How likely is that to happen?
It's 50-50. The odds used to be higher. One of the reasons is that collectors will say, just like creditors, we have a contract with the credit bureaus to report accurately. That's actually true. They
Exactly.
do. However, there's no law that says that they can't delete. That's the important thing. There's no law that says they can't delete that. And so, one of the industry secrets, some companies still use what's called a universal data form. It may have other names now, but it's a form that the collector or creditor can actually just mark for deletion and do it all electronically nowadays. So a lot of times what I tell clients is, don't give up just because the first time you call, it didn't work. Try calling at night, after hours when part-timers are in. Try calling on weekends when part-timers are in, and a lot of these collection agencies are open. Look them up in the Department of Corporations and try to find out who owns the company. And you can even send a certified letter to that person stating, hey, I'm willing to do a deletion agreement, if you agree to settle out on this amount of money. What is dangerous is if you make a settlement agreement, it has to be for what's called full satisfaction and accord of the debt.
Right.
So let's say the debt's $1,000 and you're going to pay $500 and you want that deletion agreement. You got to make sure it's worded in such a way that the other $500 doesn't sell off to yet another collection agency and thereby dinging your scores again. So, I don't want to mention companies, but when I look at a report, I know which companies right away are the problem companies, and I know pretty much which companies are more likely to do the deletions.
Just because you get something deleted. Now, first of all, this doesn't have anything to do with you paying off the collectors at an agreed amount. Once that's paid, that's paid. Once you agree upon that amount and you get your letter that it is paid in full, you're good. But however, if you're deleting an item on your credit report, don't think that that debt goes away, because it doesn't. Because if you're going to go to
Right.
Macy's, if you get Macy's off of your credit report, and then you're going to go to Macy's to get another credit card, they're going to say, "Wait a minute, you have a bill here,"
Right.
and then
Right.
they might put it back on. So you have to really be careful how you're approaching this. Yeah. So have you ever heard of that, Laurie? Though, I mean, people they think, okay, it's not on my credit report, so I'm just going to go, I'm going to go get another
That's
credit
what
card.
Yeah, no. That's the thing. And they think there are certain cases where with collectors, if it's deleted, you get a letter stating they're deleting it, you're okay. But if, let's say, for example, you're disputing through the credit bureaus and they delete it, you may still be liable for that debt. And people don't realize that they may still actually owe the money just because it's not on their credit report. You have to know which one it is. So it can be either or.
Now, I've seen instances where the credit the debt, in other words, was so old that they couldn't even find it in the system. I'm talking about the creditor. So let's say, now I'm just using Macy's. I'm not saying Macy's is the creditor.
Right.
But I'm just
an
saying,
example.
let's say you had a Macy's account 10 years ago, okay, or 15 years ago, and you left there with a debt. Now you're going back. Here it is 15 years later. You want to get a new credit card, and they give it to you.
Right.
I've seen that happen. And is that because of the statutes of limitation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because so much time has passed, and because they're going to look at your credit report now to see where it's at, that they can give you another credit card down the road.
You're listening to Real Estate Today with Yvonne Candy.
You had mentioned how the FCRA and the FDCPA is
Right.
very important to us.
Okay. Well, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is basically meant to protect both sides. It basically says that your credit should be reporting accurately. The problem is you're dealing with the credit bureaus and they don't care because you, the consumer, are not the client to the credit bureaus, even if you pay for a credit report. Their clients are the creditors and collectors that pay to subscribe. That's why there's always battles under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, with consumers trying to get things corrected because it's you versus the collector or creditor. If you have proof of something, that you paid something, for example, then the credit bureaus are supposed to consider that and correct it. It doesn't always happen. However, you can use the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau again and upload your proof and your letters, and usually that will resolve it most of the time. Now, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act is the federal law. Many states like Florida have stronger state laws. Here we have the Florida Consumer Collection Practices Act, and it's actually stronger than the FDCPA. And that applies more with debt collector harassment. So, for example, there are like a debt collector, they can call 7 days a week unless you tell them to cease and desist. But if they're harassing you, they're calling you multiple times in a day, they're robo-calling you, that could be a Telephone Consumer Protection Act violation. They call you up and say, we're considering pre-legal action. No such thing. Legal action, or not. There's no such thing as pre-legal. If they come banging on your door, I had a client who had that. Someone was banging on their door every night at 8 o'clock from a debt collection service. They're screaming obscenities, threatening you, saying you stole the merchandise, things like that.
I had a phone call the other day. A friend of mine says, would you believe that I'm getting these phone calls where they're saying that the sheriff is going to come to my house and all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, it was like harassment.
Yep. If it's regarding a debt, they need to notate that. So my clients, I give them a short list of what a debt collector can't say or do that could be considered a violation. Then I give that client, I do it with an attachment online. I give them a log, and they have to fill out the name of the company, the date, the time, the phone number, the person they spoke to, and what was said. When that happens, in my contract with clients, it says I can forward this to a local attorney I know that specializes in this, and the attorney will review it for free. And if the attorney decides to take your case, it doesn't cost you anything. It's like a personal injury case on contingency. So in the past, when I've had that happen, typically attorneys win. They don't take cases unless they really think they can win. So most of the time, winning in this kind of situation means that the credit line will be stripped off the report, and or they may get money depending upon how serious the violation is. One thing I do want people to know that are listening is a lot of debt. First off, most debt collection companies are owned by attorneys. But a lot of times the debt collectors are actually ex-felons. And I know someone who was a debt collector and was an ex-felon because they find it difficult to get jobs. So these companies find people that are more aggressive. And so where that can be of concern is, let's go back for a moment to, let's say you get an agreement to delete with a collection agency. Well, I make my clients do everything in writing 99% of the time. Sometimes you can do it over the phone, but it's risky because now there's no documented proof. But if you are giving your personal credit card information or debit information to an ex-felon, to me, that's too. I can't do that. It's too risky. So you have to be careful with what you're doing because it's very simple to become a victim of identity theft. And that actually happened to me. So I have to monitor my reports all the time. I've had a lot of bizarre things happen over the years because somebody got a hold of all my information.
Now, Laurie, you supply your clients with the law. And in other words, if they're sending a letter to a collector or to the credit bureau, whatever, do you give them the law that backs that letter up?
I don't. I don't, because I'm not an attorney. I'm a non-attorney consumer advocate. They can ask me questions, and I can give them simple explanations, and I include definitions in my reading material so that they have a basic understanding. Because the truth is, most of them don't really care about the definitions of what that is. Most of them want to learn how the process itself works. Really, it's how the process fails to work for most people. I've been doing it for a long time. I want them to see how you have to force it to work to your benefit. And then it's the teach a man the fish analogy. Once they understand how this works, well, it's a lot of work, yes. It's going to take time. Remember, it took time for your credit to get that bad. It's not going to miraculously go up to 800 in 30 days or less. It's just not going to happen. But they then have the cliff notes, so to speak, of credit, and they've learned what they've done wrong. And so I provide clients with how they can develop a good credit profile. I also provide them with an analysis back in the beginning that kind of says, here's how credit works. I modify it to their situation, and then I give them the recommendations, and then we get started. So when I work with a client, Yvonne, I say, look, when we go through this process, you cannot, if you're applying for a house, you cannot go out and buy $20,000 worth of furniture prior to closing, because you're going to destroy your credit report. You can't do certain things. You can't try to change your job unless it's in the same industry, and you got to talk to your lender. So there are certain rules, but making a big purchase, making a late payment as you're going through this process can undo everything positive that you've done. It can totally destroy it with just one late payment. Right. Because FICO, they don't really give you points. I give you guesstimates based on my experience. But the one thing FICO does tell you is that if you make a late payment on your mortgage, it is a 1 to 200 point hit. The higher your scores, the bigger the hit.
You're listening to Real Estate Today with Yvonne Candy.
I have an emergency service, and let me just tell you, I guarantee nothing. I can't guarantee anything. It would not be moral or ethical of me to say I can guarantee you anything on this. I have a high track record for the clients who actually do the work. But for anyone who makes a guarantee, even in writing, good luck, because I'm telling you the truth, there's no way you can guarantee any of this. The only things you can do are I can guarantee you can make your credit worse by doing certain things. But years ago when I would actually do all the document preparation for the clients and send things out, they get into the house, and inevitably they call me within 1, 2, or 3 months crying my score dropped 1 to 200 points. And then I realized they didn't learn anything because I did it for them. And so credit is just like money. If you can't manage your money, you probably can't manage your credit, and vice versa. So you have to have someone teach you, the money part, the saving part, the live on a budget part. Like Mint.com allows you to do free budgeting. A lot of counties in every state offer free courses in budgeting. I'm going to give you a quick tip. As far as saving money, one of the things that I've done is I will create different savings accounts, it could be at the same bank, and I name them online. Car account, vacation account, house account. Because if you put all the money into one account, you think, hey, I got $10,000. And then you got to pay your utilities, and then it starts, weeding down, and you go out, to dinner and entertainment and all that. But when you designate a certain percentage of that money or, a certain amount to go into each of those accounts, then you start to see where you're really at and how much you can save. The other thing I want to mention, too, is with all of the hacking and people getting personal information, I just had a friend who lost $4,000 because he thought he was signing up for Netflix online, and it was a Nigerian scam, and he lost all the money. Have more than one bank account. I have 3 bank accounts because if someone hits me on one, I'm okay on the other 2.
You're listening to Real Estate Today with Yvonne Candy.
And I want to mention there's a really good book called Maxed Out by James Scurlock, and that book talks about how people got themselves into trouble on the credit system. The other book I think is also phenomenal is called The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. And the premise of that book is to explain that if you have money, like, for example, direct deposited into your account, divert some of that money into a retirement fund so you learn to live without it, and that you actually do accumulate some savings for retirement. You should have at least 6 months worth of living expenses. Most people who have bad credit, they don't have a lot of money or any money at all. So the first step, of course, is getting through their credit before they even go to look for a house. But you have to have backup money in that, because what happens if you become sick or, you lose your job and something goes wrong? Well, you can't pay the mortgage. And remember, I said that's a 100 to 200 point hit. So you've got to be very conservative with the money and consider taking, some type of a financial course if you haven't, to learn how to handle the money, how to reconcile your checking accounts, for example, how to actually look at the credit card statements that come in to make sure that every little thing on there is actually yours. Most people don't even look at that. And no one teaches it, but you know what? If you go to the bank, they'll explain it to you.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Laurie is going to come back on the show and give us some more credit repair secrets. If you would like to contact Laurie, you can contact her at 813-500-6064. You can also email her at consumercreditteacher@gmail.com. And don't forget to visit her website at crediteducationconsultants.com.
You've been listening to Real Estate Today with Yvonne Candy. Don't forget to visit us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all other social media.